All right. Hi, everybody. This is Politics by Jake. We have some good shows for you this weekend, of which this is the first. And, there's so much going on, as you know, that it's difficult to get to it all. And I continually feel taxed and obsessed because there's things that I want to repeat. Like Trump's fascist cabal. I want to repeat Trump's fascist cabal, Trump's fascist cabal, Trump's fascist cabal. And I have to repeat that. And there are all sorts of things that I have to repeat. And I can't do it because there's too much. So But one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I think we do need to talk about, and I haven't talked about it so far, is Greenland. So we need to talk about that. We're going to get right into that, and I'm going to try to explain this from you, at least from my standpoint, why this would be a terrible idea. Suppose Trump goes ahead. Trump goes ahead and invades Greenland. This is a terrible idea. This is one place where you can truly lose the world in an afternoon, and it wouldn't be a strange thing for me. It wouldn't be a stretch for me or anybody else, and I'm going to explain this to you too as well, to think that that's what Trump wants to do. Trump is a destroyer. Everything he touches dies. He destroys everything he touches. And Greenland is one of those things where if he tries to do it, he's just going to blow things up. He's going to blow things up. Uh, if it hadn't been for this other tragic event, which I think is full of significance, we would have gone right to Greenland here at the outset. So here's the idea. The question of Greenland, and this is what I said to you in the beginning. I said, just stick with me in a minute. Just stay with me a minute. If you have no idea about Greenland, if you've been living under a rock in a Coke can under a landfill, just listen to me right now and you'll find out what the whole thing is. The question of Greenland is if the United States is going to use military means or actual coercion against Greenland. And this situation is such, this question is such that it's capable of transforming the entire world situation. This is what I've been telling you. Well, what I've been telling you is this: Gaza, because everybody wants to focus on Gaza. Gaza cannot transform the world situation, in my opinion, one way or another. Can't do it. Venezuela can't, cannot. Even Venezuela and Cuba, if you think those are a package, they cannot transform the world situation. But the relationship between the United States and NATO Europe, the NATO alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization of spring 1949, that can. That is the strategic heart of the world as far as the forces of civilization are concerned, and has been pointed out by a number of Europeans now. If the United States, uh, what I said in the beginning, fascist cabal, Trump, fascist cabal, Trump, it's all Trump. It's not the United States. This is not the United States operating right now. This is not the voice of the United States. It's Trump. It's Trump, 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 only Trump. Of Trump, by Trump, for Trump. If you let Trump trample on Greenland, you're essentially destroying NATO. And this is incalculable folly. And this incalculable folly meaning to an incalculable loss. It's unimaginable folly for this to take place. And this, if he does this, by the way, impeachable. Remember last week on the show, if you listen to the show, I talked about how he talked about they'll find some reason to impeach me. This is like an A number one reason right here. Of all the other reasons that there could be to impeach him, and hopefully on the shows this weekend, I'm going to get to that, and we're going to be able to talk about that. And I've got an interesting segment where we talk about that, and we compare Trump to King George, and we compare the Declaration of Independence to what Trump is doing. And it's really cool. I think you'll really like it. I hope we get to it. I think we'll get to it, but I don't think we'll get to it today. So anyway, but this is a number one impeachable. And here's why. According to the Constitution, when the Senate ratifies a treaty, so the treaty is proposed by the executive branch, by the president, by the Secretary of State, and the White House, and so forth. Once the treaty is ratified, and it takes a two-thirds majority to ratify it, this is the traditional supermajority. At that point, it becomes part of the public law of the United States. And the provisions of the treaty become part of the law, just like the Affordable Care Act or the Clayton Antitrust Act or just, whatever it is. It's law. It's not, a delicatessen where you can pick what you like. So once the treaty is duly ratified, registered, signed, sealed, and delivered, it's the law. And if you act against the treaty, you are violating the law. And that becomes impeachable. Why? Because in the oath of office of the presidency, the president has to make sure that the laws are executed. And by executed, that means they're done. The laws are followed. He has to do that. This would be impeachable. It's of course you're also violating the common defense. You're violating the general welfare. These are all preamble to the Constitution. These are the reasons why we're doing this, because we want to have a common defense. We want to support the general welfare. You're violating all sorts of things if you do this, but if you want to have something where you can say, and this is not even a policy difference, this is a violation of public laws, where the president, of course, is supposed to be the one who takes care of the laws to see that they are faithfully enforced. That's what I just said. And what's Trump doing? He's doing the opposite. He's breaking the law, and his fascist cabal surrounding him is helping him break the law. Because, as I said, Trump is Mikey. They've got him in office because he'll do anything. He'll destroy the rules-based international order, and he doesn't care because Mikey will eat anything, Mikey will do anything, and he's a doofus. He's unfit to be the president of the United States. He's unfit for any public office, whether it's state or federal. It doesn't matter. So he's doing the opposite. He's breaking the law. If he does this, he's trampling on the law. If he does this, and I was very happy after coming to this conclusion myself, which is it's not a stretch. You don't need a political science degree in order to understand this. You just need to understand the way the government works. But General Ben Hodges, former lieutenant general, retired, former head commander of the United States Army in Europe, and I see now, by the way, they've moved their headquarters from Heidelberg, which is where it used to be, sort of south, kind of on the Rhine down there. And instead it's now in Wiesbaden. And I've been in Germany, I've been to Wiesbaden. So Ben Hodges says that the members of the United States Armed Forces, top officers in particular, are going to have to search their consciences because this would be an illegal order. They're going to have to steel themselves, to strengthen themselves, to be able to refuse illegal order. What have we just been talking about with regard to illegal orders? Mark Kelly. Pete Hegseth, the Department of War, where we kill people and break things. He wants to go after Mark Kelly. He wants him demoted in rank. There was talk about having him executed. There was talk about having other senators executed. Why? Because Mark Kelly reminded the members of the armed forces that you have the ability to refuse an illegal order. And you can't obey an illegal order. You can't do it. So Pete said, the Department of War, where we kill people and break things. He got mad. I guess he didn't like that. So, and this is not just at the level of, if you're ordered to machine gun prisoners of war. No, you're not allowed to do that. It's illegal. If they're not combatants anymore, if they've been armed, they're not combatants under the Geneva Convention. It's illegal. Now, it's going to be, if you get an order that says, take the United States out of Germany and fly them home, the answer is no, because that's illegal. You're breaking up the NATO alliance. This is clear. And therefore, you're doing something which is illegal. You see? That's an illegal order. That's what Mark Kelly was talking about. You're not allowed to do that. You're imperatively commanded not to do that. And that would then be at Hegseth or at the top of the regime, people who want to do that, because again, NATO is law. And it's the common defense. It's protecting the United States. And it's many, many other things as well. But bottom line, illegal, can't do it, no way. So now, specifically, let's suppose we have to argue this, right? The first thing is, none of this is necessary even. And this is why I say this is Trump distracting from the Epstein files, because this is all gratuitous. It's futile. And I don't mean futile like the Middle Ages. I mean futile like resistance is futile. The Borg are going to be assimilated. If you say the United States needs Greenland, we break things, we kill people. It's like, why? Because, doofus, you've already got it. Because there's a treaty from 1951. And let me just go back, okay? Which is why I say this has got to be distraction. It's a very interesting thing, of course. In 1940, the first country in Western Europe that the Nazi Germany rolled over was Denmark. And sadly, this took fewer than 24 hours. And after that, the king stayed. And there was a German occupation that went on until just about the end of the war, all right? So that was the beginning of the crisis. Now, you did, and this is just as an aside, you did have about 300,000, I believe it's a large number of troops, 300,000 troops that were in the Scandinavian countries that needed to be brought back down for the defense of Berlin. But Hitler didn't do that. He didn't give that order. So they were literally there until just about the end of the war. So that's where that comes from. And Denmark was one of those, Scandinavian countries. So that was the beginning of a crisis, because once the Nazi German armies had taken over Denmark, if you're in Copenhagen, you could then say, okay, now we're the government in Copenhagen, and we Nazis demand bases on Greenland, and we want to take over Greenland. So there was, in those years, a Danish ambassador here in Washington, and he decided that on his own authority, he would not listen to the government in Copenhagen, but that he would make a deal with the U.S., which was to open up the possibility for an orderly entrance of the U.S. into Greenland. And this began then. In 1940 to 1941, Nazi Germany had put so-called hint, hint, wink, wink, say no more, meteorological stations, right? Weather stations, right? Wink, wink, say no more, on the east coast of Greenland to know what's going on in the North Atlantic, right? It's the Greenland, Iceland, United Kingdom gap. That's how. If you're in the North Sea, if you want to get out into the Atlantic, you've got to go through that, right? Again, sink the Bismarck, remember that? Where was that? It was off the coast of Greenland. It was between Iceland and Greenland. It's the Greenland, Iceland, it's a thing. It's called the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, once again. So that was the situation. So by mid-1940 or springtime 1940, the United States was already driving out those weather stations, chasing them away, occupying parts of Greenland. At this point, this is a good cliffhanger situation for us to take a break and have a commercial, after which we will be back. And this is Politics by Jake. This is Jake, here to tell you the world is on fire, only you're not being told who actually lit the match. Politics by Jake, Mondays and Fridays at 7 a.m. on KCAA. All right, then. Hi, everybody. This is Politics by Jake, the weekend shows on KCAAradio.com and also on YouTube.com/@politicsbyjake. And we were talking about the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, because this is really interesting. So you have this situation where the Nazis were on the east coast of Greenland. And this is critical. So by mid-1940 or springtime 1940, the U.S. was already driving out those weather stations, wink, wink, say no more, chasing them away, and occupying parts of Greenland. Now, of course, that was an emergency wartime measure. The United States later went on to have a similar arrangement, mutually agreed upon, with the government of Iceland. Same thing. So Greenland and Iceland were occupied by the United States during the course of 1941, months before Pearl Harbor. However, then that worked pretty well. And I can tell you that there's no bitterness left in Iceland at all, because the United States never demanded in those years. The United States' attitude was that we're not going to demand sovereignty over that territory. Sovereignty remains with the existing government. What can we call it? The indigenous government in Greenland and also in Iceland. You're not going to do the civil administration yourself. Why would you? The local police, the local judges, the local politicians, they're already there. They can do that much better than you can. And it's only lately that we have crazy neocons, I think, and we've, got to bring democracy by having someone who is like a Jerry Berger take over Iraq and immediately dissolve the military. Oh my God, what folly that was. You don't want to do those things. All you're looking for is the ability to have bases, to have access. If you want to expand that to rare earth mines and things of that sort, they're ready and they're waiting. And they're going to be very sympathetic. And on the, I'm trying to explain to you, you don't have to do this. And I think on the defensive side, I don't think you really need to negotiate anything further in order to not be abrasive and in order concordantly to be reasonable. You want to inform them. You want to work on any possible conflicts of transportation or other issues, whatever it is. You're working hand in glove with the local government. You're not aiming at sovereignty, and you're not attempting to become the police or the civil administration or anything of the kind. That all remains in their hands. You're a guest. You're using their territory for mutual defense. And of course, the mutual defense is worth having because there is a Russian threat. There is a Chinese threat. And 65,000 people on Greenland are not going to be able to defend themselves. But, the U.S. has had one very important base. It's called Thule, Thule, right? And Ultima Thule, supposedly for the Romans, it was the extreme northern point in the landmass before you got to the world of ice. And that base is still there. We're still there. They changed the name of it, but it was named Thule, Greenland, after Ultima Thule, which was the Romans. I just explained that to you. It's now the home of one of the branches of the Space Command, the United States Space Command that Trump started. So it's there. And it was a part of the DEW line. And DEW, DEW, stands for the Defense Early Warning System. And it was in the days of the fear that the Bear bombers and the Bison bombers of the Soviet Union would be coming over the North Pole. So you wanted to have a line. So this was the line that stretched from Greenland across Canada into Alaska. It was called the DEW line, Defense Early Warning. And, that's still there too. And it's still being used for similar purposes. It's got radar that can see over the horizon and other things, and you absolutely need it. You need it. The only threat, shutting that down, is something like Doge, or douche, as I like to call it. Douche. And Elon Musk, the big douche, who says, well, it's too expensive. Let's break things. Let's move fast. Let's not think at all. Let's just break things. Let's break things. Department of War. All right. The War Department. Thank you, Pete Hegseth. So the United States at one point had about 15 bases on Greenland during World War II. And you can see there was basically ruins of a couple of them left. But the point is, the treaty from 1951 gives the United States the right to keep those bases, reactivate the bases, and get them going. And this would be widely welcome because it would just, in and of itself, it would be an economic infusion because you want to do this all based on cooperation. Is there some point? I think the Trump administration, they think, hey, we don't have enough enemies. Let's make some more enemies. Let's alienate some friends because we're not hated enough. What is it? You got this idea that you think it was cool to be the object of universal scorn and execration? Because that's where you're headed. So no, that's not right. And this fighting back against this, let's just go through a couple of things. But I just want to pose it as a domestic political issue, okay? We had the hands-off demonstration. We had No Kings 1 in June, I guess it was 3 million people. Then we had No Kings 2 with 7 to 8 million people. But notice, this was almost exclusively domestic. Unless you have an agency that's carrying out political education, providing some leadership, or maybe a politician or two who are interested in providing leadership, the domestic U.S. protest scene is not going to do enough, soon enough, to deal with an issue like Greenland. And I would suggest my idea, let's have another round of demonstrations now. Spring is not that far off. The year's already going by. I would like to see a no traitors demonstration. Let's do that. No traitors, meaning don't sabotage the alliances that have kept the peace between Europe, the North Atlantic, North America, and much more, because it reaches way into the Middle East. It reaches way into Africa. And it reaches ultimately around the world to Japan and so forth. It's all part of the same security architecture, you might call it. We might call it security architecture. So let's have no traitors, okay? Don't wreck the NATO alliance. Don't do this crazy lunatic provocation of trying to take over Greenland. And again, for what? For defense? You don't need it because you got it. I mean, you need it, but you don't need to invade. It's already there. You've got bases there that were established by treaty as far back as 1940. You're already there, as I say. If you say the U.S. needs Greenland, of course, but the United States already has Greenland. And like I said, it goes back to World War II, and I remember in Iceland, they have fond memories of that stuff. When you find people who are around for it in the 50s or things like this, it's Reykjavik. Reykjavik is the capital, and the airport is Keflavik. Keflavik is also a NATO base. Today, Greenland, not that much different. So what is this? What's the point? Oh, you want to be a conquering hero? Or you want to say I conquered the biggest island in the world? This is not an American interest, my dear friends. This is Trump's megalomania. This is Trump's malignant narcissism. These are things that do not help the average American, you know? The credulous, the gullible, the easily led who helped elected you. And this is a whole show in and of itself, but just, for the sake of the argument that I'm doing right now, which is like a different thing because we're talking about Greenland. This does not help the military situation because what are you losing? Let's just look at that. You say, oh, yeah, we have to have Greenland. All right, so based on that, you're going to attack the Danish territory of Greenland. This is crazy. It's crazy. Just this last week, we had a remarkably good, one of the stronger statements coming out of Europe, right? Because they've got the burden of the two world wars, right? Extravagant casualties, much worse than the United States in both world wars. But now we have a statement saying Greenland belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland and them only to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. Well, of course, we would have to relativize that with the fact that if the communist Chinese or the Russian madmen, the Klingons, try to take over Greenland, the U.S. will have to respond. But that hasn't happened. And the best way to deal with that is to deter it, to dissuade it by having lots of bases there. And again, every base is a prosperous community. It's good community relations and have, a friendship event, a state fair kind of thing. In Wiesbaden, they had it in Wiesbaden. Once again, we're talking about Germany, the German-American Friendship Festival at Lindsay Air Force Base there, not far from the Amelia Earhart Hotel in Wiesbaden. It was real. And even there, Elvis had been there. The great asset was put on the line by the U.S. So this is all real. And the statement that I just mentioned, signed by President Macron of France, Chancellor Merz of Germany, Prime Minister Meloni of Italy, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the United Kingdom, Prime Minister Tusk of Poland, right? One of the most gallant and active and, clear-headed leaders in Europe. Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, Prime Minister Frederiksen of Denmark. So there you have the Western European Big 40, the four countries with population over 60 million, right? Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and then Spain, the Mediterranean along with Italy, and then the Prime Minister of Denmark. So that's a pretty powerful statement. And what's the word? Back off with this clowning. Back off with this provocation stuff. And at this point, let's take another break. And this is Politics by Jake, and we will be back. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. And this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. And of course, we're taking time on the first show of the weekend to talk about Greenland. And I say back off. And the NATO four, the big four, are telling you to back off. And the other countries are telling you to back off. That's a pretty powerful statement. Stop with the clowning. Stop with the nonsense. Back off with this provocation stuff. Lawrence O'Donnell, of NBC Now, I think it's called now. It's not NBC, not MSNBC anymore. He thinks that the whole Greenland gambit is just a fraud, right? It's just a diversion, and I think that there's some truth in that. I think that Trump is just doing everything that he can because he's guilty. You know, everybody knows. Everybody, I mean, it's an open secret about the Epstein files. Everybody has known about this since 2015, but now these chickens are really coming home to roost. So I think that it is a diversion, but except that this so far exceeds anything with Venezuela or Cuba. Venezuela and Cuba, these are meaningless little gambits compared to the idea of destroying NATO. You destroy NATO? That's the end of the world. Cuba? Not the end of the world. Venezuela? Not the end of the world. But the end of NATO, here's what it would be. First of all, you want to keep the Russian tankers and the warships bottled up in the Baltic? Well, how do you get out of the Baltic? You come out of St. Petersburg, you go down the Gulf of Finland, you turn south. Just look at a map. Follow me on a map. Go on the internet. Bring it up. Bring up a map. You go down the Gulf of Finland, you turn south, you go by, what is it, Bornholm, which is a Swedish island, and then there's another Danish island once you've turned west, and eventually you get to what they call the Belt. It's the Kattegat, the exit from the Baltic. And then you go up above the top of Denmark, and then you're in the Skagerrak, right? The Battle of Jutland was there. World War I, Great Sea Battle. And then you're in the North Sea. Denmark is the key to bottling up the Russian fleet. Do you understand? So you want to make sure that Denmark has everything they need. You don't want to be stingy with them like a stupid, penny pinching, nickel nursing, rent gouging Queen's landlord who's running some apartments using racial discrimination and all the rest of it. And you know who we mean. Don't do that. Allies are precious. How can you have too many friends? If they're real friends, you've got to keep them, and Denmark has proven it. Remember, we don't really agree with the global war on terrorism and the invasion of Afghanistan. That really was not the way to go. Getting rid of, knocking off a certain bin Laden, that's fine for whatever it's worth, but that doesn't get to the heart of the matter. But then what you had then was the situation where the Danes, it's a small country, their human losses were percentage-wise per capita, I think it's like 42 or 45, something like that. As many as 45 Danes died fighting along the United States and Afghanistan. And this was, I believe, proportionally per capita, the highest of any NATO country. So there's a very strong link there. Article 5. When any one of our members is attacked, it's like we were attacked. And we all come to the defense. And they did. And their people died fighting along the U.S. and Afghanistan. That stupid situation. But they did. Article 5. So, like I said, there's a very strong link there, which it has to be remembered, I think, and respected. So again, then what's this? It's a purely gratuitous, self-destructive frenzy that's being carried on by a 5-year-old, basically. I suppose because it inflates somebody's ego. But again, it violates what the preamble to the Constitution says. The purpose of the United States government is, among other things, the common defense. This violates the common defense, clearly. So, okay. So if you can't bottle them up, we were just talking about Kattegat. We were talking about bottling up the Russian fleet in the Baltic. So if you can't bottle them up, what happens then? Well, if the United States turns away from NATO, repudiates NATO, which Trump came close to doing in various fits of, I don't know what you'd call it, certainly not lucidity, but, brutal, blatant openness, what happens? So you're giving Europe the choice then. Without the United States, Europe is in grave danger of being gobbled up by the Russians, and it's what Putin wants to do. It's what Stalin wanted to do. It's what Lenin wanted to do. They wanted to go all the way to the channel and beyond. Nothing has changed. You think things are different? No. Eurasianism, Duganism, Putin, nothing has changed. Remember when you hear me say this is the hill that he dies on? Putin, that is, Vladimir Vladimirovich. This is the hill that he dies on. Nothing has changed. Nothing at all. So without the United States, Europe is in grave danger of being gobbled up by the Russians, that they're going to take Ukraine and then they're going to keep going and they're going to go into Poland. Now remember, there are nuclear deterrents there. The French have 250 nuclear weapons and it's all their own. Nobody tells them what to do with that. The British have some Trident missile submarines. Unfortunately, there are technical features like the targeting and so forth, where they rely on the United States for that. So they're not quite sovereign when it comes to this stuff. But at least they have them. And I suppose in a pinch, they can improvise something. But if it's either Russia or China, which is better? Suppose they say, well, we're afraid of Russia. We hate Russia. So we're going to ally with China. And at this point, you've got Europe plus China versus Russia, then the United States. The United States has already been catastrophically weakened as a result of that. What happens if China gets that? Well, it goes without saying. China will attack Taiwan. We talked about that on last week's show. And they'll have a good chance of winning. They've already got the island surrounded. They're conducting live fire exercises, not dummy ordnance. Live fire exercises. They'll have a good chance of winning because Taiwan does not have the depth in terms of strategic supplies and strategic stocks. It doesn't have aircraft carriers. It doesn't have a navy. So you'd have the Chinese breaking the line of islands, the first island chain, breaking out into the Pacific. This is what MacArthur used to call a peaceful lake, if certain things could be controlled. How long before the Pacific becomes a communist Chinese lake? See, this is all the old stuff. This was all warned about back in World War II. This is what's been keeping the peace. And you might say, well, why are they doing it? Because they never forget. And they're playing the long game. And their goals remain the same. And they don't want it to be a peaceful lake. They want it to be theirs. Because they're grasping. Because they're acquisitive. So is that worth it? So Trump can make some headlines or even, I don't want to know in terms of the seriousness of this stuff. And once it's Taiwan, will the Republic of Korea, South Korea, will they be far behind? And of course, then after that, Japan, very formidable country, would undoubtedly be rearming. And they are. They actually are. They're rearming very fast. And that would then increase the power of China. They could take over places like Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and all these other places. They hate them, by the way. They're already in the Philippines. They treat the people in the Philippines like second-class citizens. India would be within their sphere. What would happen then? The neutralization of India and so forth. So is that worth it? Is that something you would want to bring on? Now, once again, Trump is a doofus. Trump is Mikey. He can be gotten to do anything. That's why he's there. He's there to break things. The United States would be low man on the totem pole in that kind of a world because Russia plus Europe and China plus Japan and South Korea, they're far more formidable. They actually produce things. Talking economically, thanks to Wall Street, tangible physical wealth production here in the United States, it's almost a thing of the past. And we would need to reindustrialize and go for thermonuclear fusion power as a perspective, but immediately build hundreds and hundreds of gigawatts, which this really needs to happen, by the way, hundreds and hundreds of gigawatts of modern fourth or fifth generation pebble bed nuclear reactors. And this is another show, and we're going to talk about this, but I don't think we're going to get to this weekend. If you're serious about global warming and alternative energy, you've got to be for that. And if you don't want, if you don't accept nuclear power, instead you claim there's some problem with carbon pollution, fine. But if you don't accept nuclear power, forget your alternative energy programs because you're anti-technology and you're just trying to hide it under the story of carbon and so forth. So there's all of that. And that essentially loses the world for you. You're going to lose the world in order to satisfy somebody's obsessive fit about wanting to take over the big island. And let's take a break at this point. And this is really kind of an excitable. I'm excited, not in a good way. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll have another commercial. We'll be right back. Hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake to tell you you're not crazy. The system is rigged. Help us say it louder, won't you? Join us at patreon.com/Politics by Jake. All right. Thank you, Twin Consulting. This is Politics by Jake, and we are back. So, you can argue you're going to lose the world. This essentially loses the world for you. You're going to lose the world in order to satisfy somebody's obsessive fit about wanting to take over the big island. And, you can argue, hey, Australia, could you conceive of Australia as an island? Why not take them over too while you're at it? And of course, once you tell him that, well, he'll want to do that too. He's just a child. He's being used. He's being manipulated. He's too stupid to realize it. So this is all crazy. So, dear Congress, you get to the point where this thing with Greenland is absolutely critical. Now, what do we know? We've got couple of useful statements here from the Congress. We've got Thune. So here we have our senator, Republican senator from South Dakota, been there a long time, took over from Daschle. Remember him? Daschle was there for the Democrats. And somehow that South Dakota, McGovern, it has somehow this ability to project politicians on the national scale. The seizure of Greenland, says Thune, is not an option. Completely agree. So this is fairly restrained, but it's clearly Trump, no. Bad doggy, no. Back off. No seizure of Greenland. It's not an option. And then we have Tom Tillis. Tillis says all sorts of good things. Go to Twitter X. You'll see how he talks about Greenland. And he's retiring, of course. He's got one more year. There's nothing he has to fear, I guess, from Trump. Nothing legal that he has to fear. But Tillis wants to warn Stephen Miller in the White House, this firebrand nutso ideologue. And I guess he's the theoretician of might makes right. He says the world is run by power, power, power. That's Stephen Miller. Well, what if it's not real power, right? What if it's fake power? What if it's bluster? Does the world run on bluster? I think not. So Tillis says, look, Miller, find yourself a lane, okay? Find yourself an area of activity, a specialty. Find yourself a lane where you know something about what you're doing. And get out. Resign. Quit. Disappear. That's good. I like that. So it is, of course, vital that it seems to me that it's more urgent than Venezuela by a mile. But let's see our heroes in the House and the Senate come up with, might as well start in the Senate, right? Traditionally more foreign policy oriented, right? The House is more like domestic money, budgets, things like this. But to say there's stuff with Greenland, shut up about it. Actually, one of the Danish officials, the foreign minister, I think, said, that's enough. Quit it. Good. That's about what you'd want to do. So there we are. So let's just go through, though, in terms of Denmark and strategic potential. NATO started with 12 members back in 1949. Now there are 32. All but 2 are in Europe. So Canada and the United States are up here in North America. You look at Turkey. Part of Turkey is Europe, right? Istanbul, so forth. There's a significant population of Turks on the European continent, so they qualify too. So 32 members, 30 in Europe, 2 in North America. The population is over 1 billion people, a gross domestic product of $65.5 trillion. 1/3 of the world is between the United States and Europe. So just a couple of other things. Britain and France, as we said, are nuclear powers. Total NATO active duty military, 3.44 million. High readiness, 100,000. RDF, rapid deployment force, about 100,000. 100,000 tier 1 forces, deployable within 10 days, hopefully less. Better get some more, ready to go in 10 hours, You can surge. you can mobilize. Mobilization armies can take you up to 500,000 within 30 to 180 days. Total aircraft, 22,377. That's combat planes, including bombers. And I think there's still some. The U.S. has some B-52s and so forth. Transport aircraft, helicopters in terms of fighter jets and interceptors. Helicopters, 7,725. The United States operates 14,000. But it's the usual pattern as you get here. It's for 22,000 total, 14,000 of the U.S. You get about one third. In other words, it's 2 units of military power for U.S. to 1 unit for Europe. Navy ships, this depends on your definition, 1,143 minimum, 2,258 maximum. Aircraft carriers, how about this? Aircraft carriers, still worth having, I think. U.S. has 11. Now, actually, they should have 12. Historically, we always had 12. Now, what's with this thing? I thought Trump rebuilt the U.S. military and naval forces. Anyway, the British have 2. The French have 1. The Italians have 2. Spain has 1. So there you've got a total of 6. That takes you up to 17. The French also have 1, which I think may be under refitting right now. So that could take you up to 18. So total NATO aircraft carriers, 18. And out of those, about one third are Europe. So when you look at those Chinese totals, right, the Chinese totals say they have far more ships. Yeah. But, wait a minute. Don't compare China to the United States alone, because as long as we have those allies, those aircraft carriers are going to be active here too. And if the Chinese attack California, that becomes a NATO matter, because that's within the NATO zone. It's not out of the area. It's in the area. So that's actually important. And by the way, just in the last couple of days, we've got the Russian Shadow Fleet tankers. Now, these are bad because they carry oil, which the United States and the European Union have sanctioned that Russia is not allowed to sell that oil to other countries. And what we've just had is the tanker Marinera, Russian flag tanker, old, beat up, typical Shadow Fleet crap that has now been seized by the United States. And there was just another one recently seized as well. Much sooner than that, closer to the airing of this show, with the help of the British, or at least the vigilance, the location of the search. So to capture the Marinera, that's actually quite important. So this shows you that if you're going to do anything in this world, you want to project power against Russia, you may have to. But how are you going to do that without NATO and Europe? Because with Poland, you're right up against them. And with now Finland and Romania, and indeed Bulgaria, looking out over the Black Sea, you need those countries. So are we crazy? Well, yeah, Trump is crazy. But are we crazy? You're going to give this up? What? For what? For bases in Greenland that you can have just by asking nicely at most? So I think the division of the world into spheres of influence, this is one of the things that Putin wants. Vladimir Vladimirovich. Why it's one of the things that the Nazis wanted. The Nazi formula was nicht ein Mischungsgebiet fremde Mächte, which means no interference by powers coming from outside that region. That was their summary of the Monroe Doctrine. Monroe Doctrine served very well, deserves to be remembered, but you can't compete with a big world now. Trump parrots out something that Stephen Miller said to him, Monroe Doctrine, we believe in Monroe. We believe in the John Doe Doctrine. He can't even say it right. It's the Monroe Doctrine. He doesn't even know what he's talking about. He's a big dummy. But anyway, you can't compete with a big world now, with the industrialization of Asia and so forth on that basis. You can't do it. It's going to take more. It's going to take more than that. Obviously, you don't want hostile foreign powers coming in. We remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, some of us anyway. So there we were, October of 1962. I sure remember it. The Russians put these short to medium range missiles in Cuba, and they thought they were very clever. And this was the harebrained scheming. That's what the Soviets who got rid of him said about Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev. Harebrained scheming. That's what they used to get rid of him. They said, retire to your dacha, harebrained schemer. And it was up to Kennedy to face them down. And he did that with restraint, not bravado, not posturing, but restraint. And of course, the reactionaries, that wasn't good enough for them, but that was exactly what we needed. So if the United States regarded missiles in Cuba as an existential threat, and was 90 miles away from the coast of Florida, Well, what about now with Venezuela? That's what I think. And maybe we'll make the transition to another theme here. We'll get these references to international law. But hi, this is Jake with Politics by Jake. Do you like what you hear right now? Support the real talk then. Go to patreon.com/politics by Jake right now. Every dollar helps fight the noise. All right, and this is Politics by Jake, and we are back. So, if the United States regarded the missiles in Cuba as an existential threat, what about now with Venezuela? Why would a military attack on Greenland be tantamount to national suicide for the United States? Because that's the reality, the way I see it. It's a domino theory that reaches around the world, if you like, you want to put it that way. And I think it's quite realistic. It's not some story made up to try to scare people. So here's the idea, okay? Oil and territory. If we go back to 1936, 1937, 1938, and then war breaking out in 1939, you've got what amounts to a frenzy of land grabs and resource grabs. We can make the same argument for pre-World War I, but we just have to focus. We're not going to get to this week. Because I've got something else tomorrow that actually goes along with this. We're not going to be able to talk about that. We will. I'll get to it. But the frenzy would be things like, Germany. Germany was annexing Austria through the Anschluss, annexing the Sudetenland to protect the German minorities, bunch of crap. But that's, what it was. That was what the argument was. The fact that Poland and Hungary also carved pieces of Czechoslovakia. The Poles took Tessian. Hungary took part of Slovakia. In March of 1939, Germany takes Bohemia and Moravia. In other words, the area around Prague. Slovakia is detached and becomes an independent puppet state under Monsignor Tischner. Germany takes Memel in Lithuania. October 23rd, 1939, of course, Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Molotov-Ribbentrop line is drawn across Eastern Europe. Germany takes part of Poland. Soviets take the other part. And you've got other pressure being put on Serbia and Greece. And of course, in 1940, to begin the active phase of the war, Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, France, all seized by Nazi Germany. The Channel Islands of Britain are untenable and leave. And Italy also joins the attack on France, right? The hand that held the dagger has plunged it into the back of its neighbor. So things like that. It's well nigh universal because either once the grabbing starts, the grabbing essentially grows out of the immiseration of a long-lasting world depression, depressed levels of world trade, and you kind of have that going on right now. Once again, that's another show, and maybe we'll get into it. I want to get into it. Just like I said at the beginning of the show, there's just so much to get into. So the need for dictators to produce glory, there's that. Trump, doofus, Mikey, and otherwise he'll take over everything, he'll break anything, he'll eat anything, as long as it's McDonald's, and otherwise divert attention from their problems, like the Epstein files, often to some foreign grievance. We already went through how the United States essentially placed bases, and indeed in those days took over Greenland and Iceland, not needed anymore today in that form, just bases and some mines if that's what you want. But in September 1940, the British need destroyers, and Roosevelt says, all right, fine. We have 50 obsolescence, but still quite effective, United States destroyers left over from World War I, and therefore the U.S. would like to expand. What did the U.S. get? They got bases. Bases where? And notice it's bases, not sovereignty, not administration, just bases. Newfoundland, Canada, Bahamas, Jamaica, Santa Lucia, Trinidad, Antigua. Antigua's a great place. You ought to go there. It's just great. British Guiana, Bermuda. So it's a ring of bases to protect the Panama Canal on the Atlantic side from anything that, any showing, that the Bismarck or Gneisenau, that was another German battleship, showing up. And we can also go through Japan. 1937, Japan pulls the Marco Polo Bridge incident, starts a new phase of expansion into China. They had done the Mukden incident. I mean, this all happened. And this is what we're worried about. That's why I'm talking to you about this, because this is history, and history repeats itself. So they carved out a lot, and they wanted to carve more. The Japanese in these years also took over the colonies of Vichy France, Indochina, Vietnam, leading example there. And then, of course, once the war with the United States starts, they grab the Philippines, they grab Guam, Midway, Hong Kong, Malaya, Singapore, the Netherlands, East Indies. This is huge, right? This is Indonesia. This is where the oil was located. This was the purpose of the war, and this is important too. The reason for the hostility between the United States and Japan is Roosevelt said, if you're going to insist on conquering large parts of China, we cannot sell you any more oil. So we're going to embargo the oil. Some people say, oh, well, if we'd only sold them the oil, there wouldn't have been a war. That left them with no source. That was the idea. Don't do this, or we're going to not sell oil to you. And the Japanese said, well, screw you. So they said, all right, we're going to take it from Indonesia. But we've got to make sure that the United States fleet is not in a position to interfere with us. And that's the secret of Pearl Harbor. And it's not really a secret. It's actually, when you look at it the way I just explained it, it's quite obvious. And in the course of this, the Japanese actually take some of the Aleutian Islands. They took Attu, they took Kiska in the United States Aleutian Islands, the sort of, extreme end of that island change, cold. So there we have it. Other countries took part, but especially Germany. So let's do the Axis. We can just do that. Ethiopia is attacked by Mussolini, 1935, 1936. This allows them then, with Somalia, to create, Somalia, to create a kind of Italian African empire. Albania is taken over by Italy in 1939. In April, quite soon, when the war starts, the Italians are able to attack out of Libya into Egypt, approaching, although never conquering, the Suez Canal, which would have been a huge blow to the British. So, do you get the idea? It's the same thing. Now it's the same thing. And it's because we know about these things in history that I'm talking to you now about this. And the point is, this is a similar phase. We've seen the Russians attacking Ukraine after having messed around with other independent countries along their borders. The Chinese are conquering, you might say, large parts of the South China Sea, taking over any rock, any land, any promontory they can get their hands on. So we're in what is structurally a pre-war phase. And now, of course, we've got Trump, just as Roosevelt went south with the destroyers for the basis deal of September 1940. We've got Trump going after Venezuela, threatening Cuba, threatening, I think now the question with Colombia has been somewhat resolved. I don't know, but at least there's a negotiation announced at the White House with the president of Colombia, Petro, coming here to negotiate that one. All right, so you see what it is, okay? Do you get it? You're in a structural geometry which really resembles very much warfare, which is why you hear me say, as I have on the show, that Putin is at war with us. So what I've been describing is the structural geometry of the beginning of the Second World War. So that means that the Democrats are going to have to think beyond this sort of cost accounting and saying, well, if we dare impeach Trump, then we're going to lose the next election when we could have won it. I don't think it's that way at all. And you can't look at it with that kind of defeatism. And of course, the great danger of life in legislature is what the 19th century learned to call parliamentary cretinism, that you think you can count the votes and you can pass a resolution that somehow this is going to change the world. It doesn't. You've got to address the question of power and how you get power out of the hands of your adversary and back into your own hands. And once again, appeal to the Democratic Party in order for the people to understand why Greenland is the most awful piece of insanity that has ever been concocted in recent years. At least, you didn't like Vietnam? This is Vietnam to the 10th power and similar things. Much worse than the catastrophic success of Iraq. The thing with Greenland has got to be dropped. It's got to be repudiated. There has to be an apology. And if this cannot be done, you've got to basically again lay out that any attempt to coerce Greenland, alienate Denmark and the rest of Europe, doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in Europe would run the other way, because some of the countries in Europe are too desperate. They can't even afford it. They can't afford to sacrifice themselves for the sake of Greenland and Denmark and the principles, but enough of them would. And the ones that are on that declaration that I read to you, including the big four, once again, France, Germany, Italy, Great Britain, they are the ones. And they seem to be taking it very seriously. So make people understand what that would lead to. Show them the dominoes. That's what I'm trying to do here. Not in some vague way, but just based on statements, based on geopolitical, economic, and other realities. Make sure that gets clear. And if that does, then we'll have done something important. And if we're going to have a demonstration in the springtime, let's go beyond no kings. Let's have no traitors. Let's do that as an included feature. It doesn't have to be the only thing, but it certainly ought to be there. No traitors. Hands off Greenland. And again, hands off Venezuela too, if that helps. And this is Politics by Jake, and we'll see you tomorrow.